There are forces that never ask your permission. There are forces that do not appear in textbooks. They do not cast shadows. They do not talk. And still, they determine your every breath, your choices, your sense of self. Not through violence, not even through intent, through presence, invisible, undefinable, and ubiquitous. Some call them gravity, inertia, the social contract. Others call them guilt, memory, love. We recognize them not by sight, but by the effect they take when acting on us. The pull, the stop, the quiet prompting before acting. You cannot see the strings. You feel the weight. And for most of your life, you will act on their authority without ever knowing who generates them. You wake up already pulled. A schedule you didn't create, a tone to match, an expectation to embody. The silent architecture of behavior built from 1,000 yesterdays, all of them whispering what you should do before you've had time to remember who you are. These are not laws, they are effects, and like all effects, they require no explanation to be felt. You behave, you adjust, you believe. Not because the truth is clear, but because the pressure is constant. Think of the wind on a lake. It doesn't announce itself, it shapes the surface. Thoughts, too, bend under pressure, not by confrontation, but by repetition. You were told something once, that you're too sensitive, that success looks a certain way, that you must be strong or kind or silent. You didn't question it. Why would you? It came early, it came often. It came from someone who spoke with authority. Over time, it became less of a suggestion and more of a law of nature, one you never agreed to but still obey. These invisible forces accumulate. They settle into posture, into tone, into preference, into bias. They form the personality we present to the world, the self that emerges in reaction, not intention. You smile when you're supposed to. You nod when the room leans one way. You laugh when it keeps you safe. And so the performance becomes the person. This is not weakness, it is gravity. It is the physics of identity in a world too complex to question at every turn. You act, you reflect, but you rarely resist. Because resisting what is invisible feels like stepping into space with no oxygen. But here's the paradox. Just because something is constant doesn't mean it's natural. Just because something is invisible doesn't mean it's harmless. Just because something feels true doesn't mean it belongs to you. There are beliefs within you that arrived through exposure, not exploration, preferences shaped by proximity, not by passion, convictions inherited like furniture in a house you didn't build, but still live in. You feel them as yours, but they're not entirely. Culture is an invisible force. So is shame. So is nostalgia. So is the subtle fear of being different in a room that values the same. These forces do not demand. They suggest, over and over until the suggestion no longer feels external. It begins to feel like instinct. And so, the puppet no longer sees the strings, only the dance. But every effect has a moment before it, a cause, and every cause can be traced, not to blame, not to punish, but to understand, and perhaps to release. Ask yourself, who told you who you are? Whose silence taught you how to speak? Whose absence shaped your ambition? Which expectations feel like destiny, not because they are, but because they've never been named? The real weight is not in the event, it's in the repetition. A phrase said once fades, said twice, lingers, Said daily becomes structure. Said always becomes self. But you are not the sum of repetition. You are the awareness behind it. You are not the force. You are the field it moves through. And in that recognition, something shifts. Not all forces are binding. Some liberate. Some emerge not from the outside, but from the still center within. These forces are rare. They speak softly. They do not echo. They hum, not "you should," but "you may," not "you must," but "you could." They are curiosity, wonder, the tug toward truth, even when it disorients, the pull toward silence, even when the world demands sound. To feel the difference, you must pause. To pause is not weakness, it is rebellion. It is the refusal to move just because you've always moved. It is the suspension of response in favor of reflection. It is the moment when you hold the thought up to the light and ask, "Did I choose this? Or was I pulled here?" The universe is full of forces, but not all of them deserve submission. Some require naming to lose their hold. Others require replacing with something more honest. And some vanish the moment you notice they were never yours to carry. The weight lifts, not when the force disappears, but when you stop mistaking it for identity. So tonight, as you drift into stillness, remember, there are scripts written into your spine that you did not compose. There are habits shaped by weather patterns not of your making. And there is a self beneath all of it, quiet, patient, waiting, not to escape force, but to understand it. And in that understanding to begin again, not as a puppet, but as the hand. The mind is not a clean slate. It is a cathedral built from echoes. You walk its corridors every day, mistaking the walls for origin, the ceiling for sky. But if you stop, truly stop, and listen, you'll hear it. The murmur beneath thought, the reverberation that preceded intention. A sentence you don't remember learning, but one you still obey. A tone that feels like instinct but speaks in someone else's voice. This is not memory, this is structure, and every structure begins with repetition. In the beginning, the echo is faint, a suggestion, a correction, a glance. Don't talk like that. That's not how we do things. That's just the way it is. It bounces once and then again. The mind, pliable, seeking coherence, absorbs the sound, maps it to behavior. A pattern emerges. You begin to shift, not because you're wrong, but because you're learning what is allowed. The echo repeats, and slowly the architecture forms. Every room in your psyche has a frequency. Some are spacious, welcoming contradiction. Others are narrow, sealed by phrases so often repeated they now pass for fact. You walk through these mental chambers every day without noticing the scaffolding, the way your judgment was shaped, the way your standards were stacked, the way your tolerance for ambiguity was replaced by the comfort of familiar reverberations. We call this belief. We call it just how I am, but it began as sound, and it stayed because it echoed. Language is not just communication, it's construction. Words do not merely describe reality, they assemble it. A child who hears "you're difficult" eventually stops asking why. A teenager told, "this is success," begins to chase it without knowing if it's truly theirs. The adult becomes a monument to those early acoustics, not because they failed to think, but because the architecture was built before they learned how to question the blueprints. Echoes don't shout. they resonate, and resonance becomes design. Imagine a hallway built of phrases, each brick a repetition, each corner an assumption. Some rooms are entire ideologies. Hard work always pays off. Others, intimate mantras. I'm not lovable unless I'm useful. Still others, inherited absolutes. People like us don't do that. These phrases loop in private. They form boundaries. They open and close doors long before you reach them. And over time, you stop seeing the architecture as optional. It becomes the only house you've ever lived in. But not all echoes begin in childhood. They come through headlines, algorithms, groupthink, an idea repeated in tweets, in ads, in group chats. Until familiarity wears the shape of truth, you begin to sense not what is real, but what is repeated. And the more often you hear a phrase, the more plausible it feels. Not because it earned your trust, but because it arrived often enough to pass as yours. The echo is now inside the house. You do not question the walls, you decorate them. The architecture is maintained by silence, silence from others, silence from yourself. You might feel the tremor, a dissonance, a discomfort, but the design says, don't touch that wall. And so you don't. You avoid the thought that contradicts the echo. You explain it away. You tell yourself, the sound must be yours because it has always been there. But origin and ownership are not the same. What echoes in your mind might be someone else's scaffolding. A borrowed conviction you never chose, but repeat because it feels load-bearing. Yet architecture can be redesigned. But first it must be heard. To hear the echo is not to destroy the cathedral. It is to acknowledge that someone else laid the foundation. You begin to walk slower through those corridors. You notice which phrases always lead to dead ends, which doorways feel too narrow to step through, which rooms are dimly lit because you've never been allowed to name what lives there. This is how re-architecture begins, not with demolition, with listening. The mind's structure is not fixed. It is elastic, living, breathing, and echoes once noticed can be softened, rewritten, replaced. A lie repeated 1,000 times does not become truth, but it does become architecture. And that is why it must be examined, because we do not live in truth, we live in its infrastructure. And the echo that forms the hallways of thought will determine which ideas feel like exits and which feel like walls. Ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Was it whispered or shouted? Did I agree or did I adapt? Was this an echo I heard so often I began to repeat it? And if I repeat it now, does it still serve me? Whose voice shaped this ceiling? Whose silence poured the foundation? To reconstruct thought is not to erase the past. It is to choose what endures. You may still keep certain echoes. Some are sacred. Some carry wisdom carved through time. But let them be chosen, not inherited by accident. Let them ring true because you've traced their source, not because they arrived first. Let the walls speak, then decide if you still want them. In time you will discover you are not the hallway, you are the architect. And the echo was never just a sound, it was an invitation to listen deeper, to build again, to speak in your own voice. And hear, for the first time, silence that does not demand a shape. Eventually, you speak without hearing the echo follow. You decide without waiting for ancestral approval. You enter silence, and it does not correct you. You begin to build. Not with certainty, but with awareness, with blueprints drawn from experience, not fear, with materials you gathered slowly, questions, mistakes, pauses, reevaluations. This new architecture won't be clean, it won't be symmetrical, it will not echo with perfection, but it will be yours. And when others walk through it, they may feel confused. They may ask, "Where's the familiar voice?" You will smile and say, "It's quiet here, so I can hear myself think." This is the real paradox. The architecture shaped by echo is not destroyed by shouting. It is softened by listening, by re-listening, by realizing that most of what you thought was you was just someone else, repeated too many times to notice. So ask yourself now, in the quiet, which beliefs still echo without your consent? Which phrases feel like home but never offered you rest? Which thoughts loop not because they're wise, but because they've been loud? And when you find them, don't curse them. They were your foundation once. They got you here. But now, you're allowed to build a door and walk through it. Physics teaches us a body in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. But what if that outside force isn't matter or energy? What if it's a thought? What if belief is the hand that redirects the trajectory? Not by contact, but by conviction. You were taught that reality behaves by fixed rules, that cause leads to effect, that effort produces outcome, that truth is indifferent to belief. And yet, you've seen it happen. A person so certain they will fail that failure bends to meet them. A hope so unshakable that the world reshapes itself to accommodate it. Belief is not just mental, it's kinetic. We like to think belief is passive. A mental stance, a flavor of thought. But belief exerts pressure, it pushes, it guides your eyes toward what confirms it. It stiffens your posture when challenged. It alters the timing of your words, the trust in your steps. You've seen the pattern. The person who expects betrayal sees it in every silence. The one who believes in their worth asks differently, waits differently, hears no differently. The child who is told they are a burden begins to move like weight. Belief doesn't just reside in the mind, it lives in motion, and that motion rewrites what was supposed to happen. We think of belief as subjective, but it leaks into systems, into relationships, into outcomes. Two people enter a room. One believes they are welcome, one does not. The room is the same, but it responds differently, because people respond to motion, and motion is dictated by belief. This is the quiet engine of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Not magic, not fate, just momentum. Belief initiates motion. Motion invites reaction. Reaction reinforces belief. And the cycle continues, faster, tighter, until the loop becomes identity. I'm always the outsider. I ruin good things. I'm the dependable one. I have to earn love. These are not just stories. They are laws of motion, written not in physics textbooks, but in childhood bedrooms, whispered lessons, unspoken family rules. But here's where the illusion begins. You mistake the effect for the origin. You say, "This always happens to me," not realizing you are the consistent element. Not because you want it, not because you deserve it, but because you believe it. And belief, repeated, becomes gravity. You think you're observing the world. But often you're watching your own convictions play out in slow, exquisite choreography. There is no neutral belief, even the quiet ones. I'm not interesting. I'll never really change. This always goes wrong eventually. They bend the space around you. They don't shout, they shape. And the world, always listening, begins to comply. But here's the paradox. The mind does not wait for proof. It creates it. You search for what you expect to find, and you find it because you look there. The person who believes love must be earned will overlook the kindness given freely. They'll lean toward the partner who demands performance, who makes them prove their worth again and again. And when it hurts, they'll say, "See, I knew it." The pain is real, but it arrived because belief moved first. This is not blame, it's mechanics. But belief is like a lens. It doesn't invent the world, but it tints it. It frames what is visible and obscures what could have been seen. Even science bows to belief in strange corners. The placebo heals not through chemistry but through certainty. The double-slit experiment, where observation affects outcome, whispers that even particles may notice how we watch. We do not simply discover reality, we participate in it, and belief is our first gesture. So ask yourself, what do I believe about pain, about joy, about time, about who I must be to deserve peace? Where did those beliefs begin? How long have I been moving according to their gravity? And most importantly, what would I do differently if I believed something else? This is not about positive thinking. This is about trajectory, about naming the subtle tilt that began long ago. When someone looked at you and said, "Be careful," and you internalized the world as dangerous. When you failed once and no one said, "Try again." So you began to believe success was for other people. When love came with conditions, so you assumed it always would. And so your body moved differently. And so the world responded differently. And the loop closed. But belief can be rewritten, not with slogans, but with repetition, with experience, with interruption. You do something unexpected. You pause where you used to react. You reach out when you would have withdrawn. And the result does not match the prediction. The old law of motion falters. And in that gap, possibility enters. Belief is not fixed, it is practiced. And anything practiced can be reshaped. You can begin again. With a new sentence, a new posture, a new rhythm, you can become the outside force. That changes your own trajectory. So tonight, consider this. What belief has bent the shape of your days? What rule have you followed, not because it was right, but because it echoed too many times to question? What if you stood still, just long enough to feel the motion that has always carried you, and chose to move differently? Belief, like motion, is powerful, but neither are permanent. Both can change, with friction, with awareness, with choice, and perhaps, just perhaps, the truest form of freedom is not stillness, but motion born from belief you chose. You are told you have free will, that your choices are yours, that you are the one pulling the levers, choosing the path, writing the story. and it feels true. After all, you decide what to wear. You decide what to say. You decide where to go. But look closer. Where did the options come from? Who placed the menu in front of you? Who taught you which answers were possible? Choice. The choice, you see, does not begin with freedom. It begins with framing. And framing begins before you even arrive. The illusion of choice is not that you are forced. It is that you are guided gently, subtly, so gently that the strings feel like instincts, so silently that the script sounds like your own voice. But look at how often your choice aligns with expectation. The career path approved of by your parents, the tone of voice accepted in your community, the opinion shaped by the headlines you happen to see. You move, you decide. But within a perimeter drawn long before you could protest, the puppet never sees the string, because it's sewn into the skin. We mistake customization for autonomy. We choose the color of the shirt. But the shirt was pre-designed. The rack was stocked by someone else. The store was built on a street we didn't pave. This is not cynicism. It is awareness. The mind craves authorship, but it often accepts suggestion. It craves agency, but it rarely checks where the stage ends. There are countless invisible puppeteers, culture, upbringing, trauma, algorithms, the desire to belong, the fear of being wrong, the reward of approval, the punishment of silence. Each one pulls, not with force, but with familiarity. They whisper, "You chose this," while guiding the hand. And because you feel movement, you believe it's yours. But ask yourself, what were the choices you were never given? What was considered too much, too weird, too risky before you could even wonder what it meant? Which part of your identity was pre-filtered? Which desires were pre-categorized as acceptable? What beliefs were handed to you, like family heirlooms, too sacred to question? Freedom is not measured by how many options you have. It's measured by how many you're allowed to imagine. And imagination is shaped by repetition. You repeat the same stories about what's possible. You rehearse the same roles. You see the same futures in media, in language, in rituals. And slowly, impossibility feels impolite. Unfamiliar choices feel dangerous, and autonomy shrinks into a mirror maze, where every reflection points back to the same narrow path. The paradox is this: you choose, but you do not choose what to choose from, and that first scaffolding is where the strings are tied. Even rebellion is often permitted. There are culturally approved ways to resist, ways that look like freedom, but are simply the other side of a pre-approved coin. You dye your hair, you reject religion, you post a different opinion, and you call it freedom. But was the rebellion expected? Was it already part of the show? Was your dissent already echoed in the system, sold back to you as authenticity? Sometimes even the puppet believes they've cut their strings, while dancing to a more elaborate choreography. This does not mean we are powerless. It means we are programmed. And awareness is the only knife that cuts strings clean. But even the knife must be chosen, and even the choice to cut is influenced. So what then? Are we trapped? Not quite. Because while you cannot control the puppet's beginning, you can begin to see the stage. And once you see the stage, you can ask, who wrote this scene? The first step is not to act freely. It is to doubt permission. Why does this feel safe? Why does this feel familiar? Who benefits if I choose this? What part of me is being avoided? You do not need new answers. You need real questions. Questions that do not come from the script. Questions that pause the play. Choice is only free when it emerges from silence, not from habit, from reflection, not from reaction, from pause dash, not from pressure. The strings will not fall away on their own. They must be felt, traced, named, and then sometimes forgiven. Because many were tied in love, or fear, or survival. The parents who limited your options thought they were protecting you. The culture that narrowed your path thought it was preserving itself. Even the system that conditioned you thought it was efficient. So do not pull the strings with rage. Pull them with understanding. And then, when you are ready, cut them with clarity. Freedom is not loud. It is quiet. It does not look like rebellion. It looks like slowness. It looks like asking before answering, pausing before agreeing, standing still when every current demands motion. The puppet moves, the free person watches, and only then chooses. So tonight, ask not what you want, but where that want began. Ask not what you believe, but who taught you to believe it. And in the stillness between those two questions, you may find something raw, a movement that doesn't echo, a thought that doesn't beg for approval, a voice that doesn't perform. That is the one to follow. And then something shifts. You don't jump, you don't dance, you hesitate, not because you're afraid, but because the old performance no longer fits. The marionette waits for the next tug, and none comes. This moment is uncomfortable, unscripted, unoptimized, but it is the birthplace of real choice. Real choice feels like risk because it leaves the script behind, because it may upset others, because it does not come with applause. You might lose the role you rehearsed for years. You might disappoint the audience that believed in your character. But what you gain is radical responsibility, not just for the choice, but for the frame in which the choice becomes visible. And that is where freedom begins, because freedom is not about control, it's about authorship. To write the rules, to build the game, to choose not just your moves, but the reason you play at all. There is a presence you carry with you, not a ghost, not a god, a gaze. It follows you into rooms. It shadows your voice in conversation. It lingers over every gesture, every pause, every imperfection. It is not a single pair of eyes, but a composite of all the eyes you've imagined. Everybody is watching. That's how it feels. But look closer, and you'll see no one is looking for you. Not really. They are watching the idea of you, the shape they believe you occupy. And even that, only briefly before turning inward to nurse their own reflection. Everybody's watching nobody, and still we perform. You grew up learning to scan the room, to adjust your brightness, to dim when necessary, to glow just enough to be seen, but not scrutinized. And over time you internalized the crowd. You built a theater in your mind, filled every seat with imagined critics, judges, former classmates, silent parents, future strangers. They watch everything you do, Or so you believe. So you rehearse, you pose, you filter, you curate, until the act becomes indistinguishable from the actor. But here's the paradox. They're not watching you. They're watching themselves, watching how you might reflect them. Your success makes them question their own pace. Your vulnerability reminds them of theirs. Your difference disrupts their sameness. They do not see you. They see the tremble in their own perception. And still we perform for them. We perform for the partner who might leave, for the family who cannot see beyond legacy, for the strangers who scroll past. We perform for the past self who wanted to be chosen, for the future self we hope will be proud. We live not lives, but auditions. Social life is shaped not by who you are, but by who you fear others think you are. And because you fear their gaze, you preempt it. You try to control it. You build a self that answers their question. Before they ask it, am I worthy? Am I enough? Am I likable? You begin to act as if you are being seen at all times, and that act becomes identity. But no gaze is steady, no audience sits still forever, and even when they watch, they do not see clearly. Their lenses are scratched, their memories distorted, their attention fleeting. The version of you they respond to is a shadow cast by your presence against the wall of their expectations. You chase their approval as if it were a mirror, but it's fogged, and you lose yourself in the wipe. We live in a surveillance loop, not from cameras, but from consciousness, self-consciousness, hyper-awareness, the internal CCTV that never shuts off. You cannot dance without wondering how you look dancing. You cannot speak without hearing the echo of how it lands. You cannot rest without wondering if it looks lazy. And so you become a manager of optics, a strategist of expression, a curator of selfhood, and slowly, a stranger to your own instincts. The truth is devastating and liberating. Most people are not thinking about you. They are thinking about what you think of them, and this spiral of mutual self-surveillance creates a social architecture where nobody truly sees and nobody feels truly seen. Everybody is watching nobody, and yet we bend ourselves to the ghost of a gaze that never settles. Ask yourself, when did I begin to speak with an audience in my head? When did I start narrating my life to invisible viewers? When did privacy become just rehearsal? What part of me am I constantly adjusting? And for whom? There is a concept in psychology, the spotlight effect. It tells us we overestimate how much other people notice us, our flaws, our mistakes, our awkwardness. We think our stumbles are neon signs, but most passers-by never look up. They are too busy scanning their own mirrors. And yet, even knowing this, we cannot relax the pose, because the gaze may not be real. But the tension it creates is. There is a second gaze, more dangerous than the first, not of strangers, not even of friends, but of the internal audience, assembled over years, made of teachers, critics, siblings, doubters. They live in the balcony of your psyche, and they clap only when you conform. They boo when you take risks. They whisper when you stutter. They hold up scorecards when you fall in love with the wrong person. They are fictional, but their standards shape your movements. You perform for them. even when you are alone, especially then. But what if there is no audience? What if you walk into a room and imagine no one is watching? Not that they are blind, but that they are not measuring. How would you move? What would you say? Would your body loosen? Would your laugh be louder? Would you return to the unfiltered version of your own rhythm? That version exists. It has simply been waiting beneath the applause. Freedom is not found in being unseen. It is found in not needing to be seen. To exist fully. You are not a performance. You are not a product. You do not owe anyone a polished version of your humanity. You are allowed to stumble without editing the replay, allowed to feel without captioning the experience, allowed to exist without packaging your presence. So much of your exhaustion is not from doing dash, but from displaying. You don't just live, you render, you monitor, you polish, you worry. What if they misunderstand? What if they misremember? But life was never meant to be a presentation. It was meant to be lived, not previewed. When you realize this, you return to something sacred. The unrecorded moment, the quiet decision, the unfiltered face, the walk taken with no one watching. This is not obscurity. This is intimacy with yourself. So tonight, take off the costume no one asked you to wear. Leave the stage that exists only in your mind. Let the imaginary audience find another play. You are not here to be witnessed. You are here to be. There is a comfort in patterns. They promise predictability. They feel like knowledge. They offer the illusion of control. The mind is a pattern-hungry machine, forever stitching shapes into chaos, weaving cause and effect where none may exist, sensing rhythm in randomness, story in noise. You begin to believe the repetition is truth, that because something has happened before, it must happen again, that the shape of yesterday determines the limits of tomorrow. And so, you stop looking for exits. You follow the loop, not because it's right, but because it's recognizable. Familiarity is not proof, but it feels like safety. You trust it the way a child trusts a well-worn blanket, not because it offers protection, but because its texture matches memory. You return to the same relationships, the same outcomes, the same thought spirals, because they echo something known. Even if that known is painful, you'd rather predict the pain than risk the uncertainty of peace. The fallacy is this: you believe you've made a choice, but you've only recognized a shape. A person feels familiar, so you trust them. A situation echoes a past hurt, so you brace for it. An opportunity appears. But something inside whispers, "This is not how your story goes," and you step away. It's not logic, it's pattern memory. And pattern memory isn't wisdom, it's repetition with good PR. Sometimes the pattern is the problem, but it looks like a solution. Because it's always been there, like the voice that says, "You always mess this up." Don't hope too much. Stay where it's manageable. The pattern doesn't punish, it contains. It's the fence that saves you from risk, and also from possibility. You begin to favor the known loop. You date the same archetype. You recreate the same dynamic. You trigger the same collapse. just with different scenery. And every time you tell yourself, "This is just who I attract. This always happens to me. I guess I don't change." But patterns are not fate. They are echoes you keep answering. Patterns survive by disguising themselves as reality. You stop questioning them, not because they're true, but because they feel inevitable. You say, "I'm just not good at relationships. I always self-sabotage. I don't do well under pressure." You wear these phrases like armor, but they are walls, and walls only feel strong because you've leaned on them for too long. The mind craves predictability more than happiness, and it will return to what is known, even when it harms you. The nervous system relaxes not to joy, but to familiar rhythm, even if that rhythm is sadness or chaos or abandonment. If it happened enough times, it becomes the background music of selfhood. You hum it unconsciously, and anything that disrupts it, even love, feels off-key. This is why healing feels wrong at first. Peace feels suspicious. Kindness feels manipulative. Safety feels boring. You were taught to dance in dysfunction, so stillness feels like a trap. You flinch not at danger, but at unfamiliar safety. You leave what feels good because it doesn't match the pattern. And the pattern always wins unless you pause long enough to see it. Seeing the pattern is not enough. You must sit with it. Ask it questions. Where did you come from? Whose voice are you echoing? What fear are you protecting? Patterns are not random. They are survival stories, scripts written in childhood, rehearsed in adolescence, perfected in adulthood. You didn't choose them, but you've been living inside their logic. The fallacy deepens when you begin to anticipate the loop. You sabotage opportunities because you believe you'll ruin them eventually. You leave before you're left. You fail on purpose, so the failure won't surprise you. And you call it realism, maturity, wisdom. But it's just pre-trauma. It's living inside the outline of an event that hasn't happened yet. You fear the pattern so much that you become its executor. Patterns are not just in action. They live in perception. You read neutral moments as threats. You misinterpret silence as judgment. You find meaning in coincidences because your brain is stitching continuity from fragments. It feels like foresight, but it's bias. You are not seeing what is. You are seeing what the pattern expects. And the pattern is louder than the present. There is no quick way out. The pattern is not broken by willpower. It is loosened by curiosity. Not, "How do I fix this?" but "When did this begin?" Not, "Why am I like this?" but "Who taught me this rhythm?" Because every loop has an origin, a moment when something hurt and the mind decided, "I will never let that happen again." So it built a shape and called it protection, even when it became a prison. The first interruption is always the hardest. You let the kind person stay. You take the opportunity even though it feels too big. You rest instead of proving yourself. You trust without evidence. And everything inside you screams, "This is not the pattern. This is unsafe." But it's not unsafe, it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity is where growth lives, not beyond the loop, but just outside its edges. The loop loses power, not when you avoid it, but when you name it mid-cycle. You say, "I feel the urge to run." This is the part where I sabotage. I feel doubt rising. This is the moment I'd normally shut down. I'm bracing for abandonment, but maybe it's not coming this time. Naming is not weakness, it's strategy. The pattern thrives in silence. You rob it of strength when you speak it out loud. Eventually, you will choose differently, not because the pattern is gone, but because you've stopped believing it is truth. It still whispers, but you don't obey. It still stirs, but you pause before reacting. And that pause is where the pattern cracks. Through that crack, a new shape begins, a shape that doesn't loop, a shape that expands. They say the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered, stable, fixed, unaffected by you. But this is a myth. Some truths vanish when looked at directly. Some shift shape the moment you name them, and others only exist because you observed them at all. There are things in this world that change when you watch, and sometimes the act of witnessing is what brings them into being. In quantum physics, there is the observer effect. A particle behaves differently when it's measured. Its path, once uncertain and spread like a wave, collapses into a point when you try to pin it down. It is not that you changed it physically, but that your intent to measure forced the particle to make a choice. Before you observed it, it was many things. Afterward, it was just one. And in that narrowing, something is lost. Possibility, ambiguity of freedom. This is not just subatomic, it's personal. Your life is full of particles. Moments, memories, people, potentials that behave one way when unobserved, and another when held beneath the lens. The love you examine too closely becomes performance. The instinct you question too much turns into anxiety. The dream you try to explain starts to crumble under definition. You are not just a witness, you are a participant. And what you look at looks back. We assume seeing is passive, but seeing is an act of selection. To observe is to slice time, to isolate context, to prioritize one version of the story over others. You look at your past tense, and it becomes what you focused on. You look at someone you love, and they sense the shape you project onto them. You label yourself, and the unlabeled parts begin to shrink. Observation narrows the field, but in doing so it creates clarity at the cost of wholeness. So much of what we call truth is not absolute. It is responsive. It adapts to the attention placed on it. Think of a conversation. The moment you try to define what it meant, something evaporates. Think of a memory. The more you revisit it, the more you rewrite it, not intentionally, not maliciously, but inevitably. You don't remember the original. You remember your last version. And over time, the past becomes a collage of what you believed it to be. This is not a flaw. It is a feature of perception. Your mind is not a camera. It is a filter. It highlights, interprets, fills gaps. And because it is so good at this, you trust what it shows you. But what it shows you is only what you asked it to find. Observation reveals bias, not just in others. In yourself, you expect someone to betray you. So you scan for betrayal. You believe you're not enough. So you amplify evidence that confirms it. You assume you'll fail. So you hold back, ensuring the prophecy fulfills itself. You are not seeing the world. You are seeing your suspicion reflected back. And the longer you look, the truer it feels. But here lies the twist. Even kindness changes under scrutiny. Even joy dissolves if dissected too soon. Some truths must be lived, not studied. Some feelings are clearest in motion, not in still frames. Not everything is meant to be understood while it's happening. And not everything you pin down was meant to be captured. Think of a dream the moment you try to explain it. It slips. What felt vivid becomes fog. You wake up with a feeling so deep it rewires your day, but when you speak it aloud, it loses voltage. This is the cost of translation, from inner to outer, from wave to point, from mystery to explanation. And some truths, some beautiful, necessary truths, only survive in the fog. But don't confuse this with avoidance. To not observe is not the same as to ignore. It is a form of trust, a surrender to the unknown, an understanding that some parts of yourself exist more honestly in the peripheral. There are truths you find only when you're not looking, like clarity arriving while you're washing dishes, like forgiveness emerging years after the apology, like self-worth surfacing when you're not performing for it. These truths do not demand attention. They unfold in silence, in surrender. And when you try to stare at them too hard, they hide. Not because they are weak, but because they are wild. Not all observation narrows, some widens, when done gently. To observe without naming, to witness without judging, to see without shrinking the subject into definition. This is a kind of love, the rare kind, the quiet kind, the kind that says, I don't need to understand you fully, to sit beside you in awe. You can do this with people, with memories, with yourself. You can stop trying to know and begin to notice. The deepest truths are not declared. They're recognized, not proven, but felt. Like resonance in your bones, like the sound of your name said by someone who sees you. They do not need explanation to be real. They need space and silence. So tonight, step gently around the urge to define. Let the truth be alive. Let it breathe in possibility. Let it flicker between wave and particle. Because sometimes the act of not observing is what keeps it whole. That identity, your sense of self, is not untouched by this either. The more you observe yourself, the more you perform. The inner witness becomes the inner editor. Your spontaneity becomes choreography. You ask not just, how do I feel, but what does this feeling say about me? And in that meta-awareness, something goes missing. The directness, the simplicity, the quiet certainty. There are moments that require immersion, not analysis. To live them fully, you must lose the mirror. There's a strange relief in realizing you do not have to catch every truth in words. You can let some truths move past you like music, felt, not translated. You can let experiences happen without becoming data. You can trust that not everything must be named to be known. There is wisdom in mystery. There is clarity in the unspoken. There is safety in not pinning every butterfly to a board. The moment matters, whether or not you understand it in real time. But this is not a call to abandon truth, only to question what form it wears. Sometimes truth is an unfolding, not a statement. Sometimes it's layered, contradictory, alive. Sometimes it only reveals itself when you stop trying to make it final, because truth is not always what stays the same. Sometimes truth is what refuses to stay the same when reduced. You may feel the need to fix reality in place, to find a stable truth you can rely on, to say, "This is who I am, this is how things are, this is what that meant." But notice, how often do those fixed truths age well? How often do they survive new context? How often do they resist revision? What you knew then was true then, and now you may need a new version. Truth is not betrayal when it evolves. You are not disloyal for changing your mind. You are simply doing what reality does, adapting under observation. This is the strange hope inside the paradox. If truth changes when you watch it, then perhaps pain does too. Perhaps identity does. Perhaps the future is not fixed. What you expect from the world might still surprise you. What you thought was certain might still breathe. And if observation limits some things, it may also liberate others. By noticing what you've ignored, you free it. By watching your own defenses, you soften them. By seeing yourself clearly, without distortion, without agenda, you change. Not because the truth has shifted, but because now you're ready for a wider version of it. So tonight, let go of the need to define what you're feeling. Let the silence be whole. Let the truth arrive not as an answer, but as an atmosphere. You are not a scientist. You are not a machine. You are not a passive observer of a distant world. You are in it, of it, a part of what you are trying to understand. And sometimes, to know the truth, you must stop trying to own it. There are memories you return to often. The first heartbreak, the humiliating mistake, the missed chance, the conversation that changed everything. You play them back in high fidelity, rehearsed, vivid, etched in meaning. They form your story. They justify your fears. They explain who you became. But what if some of them never happened? Not like that. Not fully. Not the way you remember. What if your most intimate memories are fiction stitched with conviction? What if parts of your identity are built on ghosts? Memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. Every time you recall an event, you are not opening a file. You are rebuilding the scene. From fragments, feelings, assumptions, echoes. And with each retelling, you do not reinforce accuracy. You reinforce belief. You make the memory yours, but not necessarily true. There are memories you've rehearsed so often you forgot where the details came from. A gesture borrowed from a movie. A word remembered not from the moment, but from a later retelling. A facial expression inferred, then retroactively inserted. And because you felt it, you believe it. But feeling is not evidence. Emotion enhances memory, but also distorts it. And in that distortion, you begin to worship illusions. Some memories are not yours. They were given to you. A story your family told over and over until you believed you lived it. You were always the quiet one. You never liked crowds. You were the smart one, the difficult one, the responsible one. And because they said it with certainty, you adopted the memory like a hand-me-down coat. Even if you didn't feel it at the time, you made it retroactively true. To belong, to make sense, to stay consistent. You do this to others too. You remember your ex as cruel because it helps justify the ending. You remember your childhood as lonelier because it explains your self-protection. You remember the argument as more one-sided because it maintains your narrative of being misunderstood. This is not deception. This is narrative maintenance. And narrative, once stabilized, becomes sacred. The mind wants cohesion. The self wants story. And so you revise the past. Not to lie, but to survive. To explain why you're still afraid. To prove why you're still angry. To defend why you keep certain doors shut. Even if the original event was smaller than you recall, or softer, or different, memory becomes magnified by the emotions you attach to it, and eventually the emotion is the memory. But what about the memory that never existed at all? Not distorted, invented. You'd be surprised how easily this happens. A suggestion, a dream, a photograph out of context, a sentence spoken with conviction. Don't you remember when? And suddenly your mind begins to fill in the blanks, because the brain prefers a bad story to a blank page. You invent context, you fabricate cause, and the invention feels real because it completes the loop. This is not rare, it is human. Psychologists have studied this. People can be convinced they were lost in a mall as a child, convinced they saw footage that never existed, convinced they confessed to things they didn't do. Not because they were weak, but because the imagined scenario became more coherent than the uncertainty of not knowing. False memory is not failure. It is the brain protecting its narrative, even if the cost is truth. So what does this mean? That you can't trust anything? It means you must hold memory with humility. You must recognize that the past is less like stone and more like smoke. It shifts depending on your angle, your mood, the questions you ask, the story you need it to serve. And yet memory matters, because even false memories shape real behavior. You flinch at affection because you remember being betrayed. You don't take risks because you remember failure. You distrust peace because you remember chaos. And even if those memories are skewed, their effect is real. You live in reaction to ghosts, phantom events, half-truths posing as gospel, and the loop persists. Not because of what happened, but because of what you believe happened. So what can be done? Not erasure, not certainty, but curiosity. Ask, what do I gain from this memory? What identity does it support? What fear does it justify? And then ask, what if it happened differently? What if it wasn't as clear? What if I've been rehearsing a script? That started as a guess. You will not find perfect answers, but you will loosen the illusion. And in that loosening, freedom. There is power in saying, I don't know if that's how it really happened. Not to invalidate your pain, but to invite possibility. Because if the past is not fixed, then the self is not fixed either. And if the memory is malleable, so is the meaning you gave it. You can stop telling the story the same way. You can reclaim what the false memory stole. you can forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you no longer trust the courtroom in your head. There are memories that never happened, and they're still shaping you. But now, you see them, and in seeing them, you change them. And in changing them, you change yourself. Not by rewriting history, but by releasing it. Let the story breathe. Let the silence return. Let the memory dissolve into what it always was, a bridge, not a destination. Time does not move at the same pace for everyone. It bends, it coils, it vanishes. We're taught to think of time as objective, 60 seconds, 1 minute, tick, tick, tick. But that's not how it feels. Not really. You've sat through hours that passed like minutes, and lived through minutes that ached like hours. You've fallen into a gaze and emerged later, somehow older but unchanged. You've checked the clock 3 times in one breath, because the moment felt longer than logic. This is not a glitch, it's a clue. Time is not measured by clocks, it is measured by attention. When you look directly at time, it hides. When you forget to watch it, it runs. This is the paradox. Time seems most real when you are least present. Boredom stretches it, waiting distorts it, fear slows it, wonder stops it. The more you pay attention to time, the more it drags. The more you're absorbed in something else, the more it disappears. Time is not a flow, it's a feedback loop. In childhood, days feel enormous. Summer is a kingdom, a week is a lifetime. Why? Because everything is noticed. The texture of the wall, the sound of your own breathing, the creak of every step. Novelty expands perception. Each new stimulus demands attention, and attention slows the clock. But as you age, the world becomes familiar. You stop paying attention. You start predicting. And time, unchallenged, contracts. Repetition shrinks time. Routine compresses it. If nothing surprises you, nothing sticks. Your brain stops recording. It loops through old files. You arrive at Friday with no memory of Monday, and you wonder, where did the week go? It was swallowed by unobserved moments. Attention is what pins time in place. Without it, the moment slides. Think of driving a familiar road. You arrive, but barely remember the journey. Your hands moved, your eyes saw, but your mind wandered. The present was ghosted, and time slipped past unnoticed. Now think of a near accident, the way the seconds slowed, how every breath felt magnified, how 5 seconds lasted an eternity. Fear spiked attention, and time expanded. This is the elasticity of experience. You do not live time, you live through time, and how wide each moment feels depends on how fully you are inside it. Not all minutes are equal. Some are hollow, some are infinite. It is not the clock that determines duration, but the soul's presence. The question becomes, how much of your life are you actually in? How many meals have you tasted halfway? How many conversations have you rehearsed while having them? How many sunsets have you filtered instead of felt? You don't remember the day because you were not inside it. You were beside it, thinking, checking, projecting. Time passed, but you were not there. Technology makes this worse. Every interruption fractures time. Every ping splits your thread of presence. Every scroll retrains your sense of duration. You touch 100 things in a day and remember none of them, because attention is scattered, and scattered attention cannot anchor experience. This is why years feel shorter now, not because you are older, because you are less here. There is no solution in speed. You cannot outrun the vanishing. You cannot capture time by chasing it. You must reverse the logic. To stretch time, you must slow down. Not externally, internally. You must widen your presence. You must touch what you're doing. As you're doing it, you must occupy the moment, not skim its surface. This is how you re-enter time. Consider this. There are moments you will return to for the rest of your life, but not because they were long, because you noticed them. The way someone looked at you just before they said goodbye. The silence after the music stopped, the weight of the air in the middle of a realization. Those seconds weren't extended. They were saturated. Saturated moments stretch memory. They become anchors, and a life made of anchors feels full. But a life of distraction feels like a blur. It doesn't matter how much you did. It matters how much you lived. And living is not the same as existing. Existing is passage. Living is presence. Presence demands attention. And attention restores time. This is not romanticism. It's neurology. Studies show focused attention alters time perception. People immersed in flow states lose track of hours. But later, those hours feel full. Time felt short while happening, but deep in memory. Meanwhile, distraction fragments time, and memory struggles to store it. You forget not because the moment wasn't important, but because your mind was elsewhere. So how do you reclaim time? Not with scheduling, with returning. Return to the moment, return to the task, return to your breath, without narrative. Notice what's around you. Without labeling it, let sensation lead. Let curiosity sharpen focus. Don't just look, see. Don't just listen, hear. This is how time opens again. Attention is a form of reverence, a kind of prayer. To give full attention is to say, this matters. This is enough. I am here. And in that offering, time stretches its limbs, not to delay death, but to restore depth. Tonight, as time begins to slip again, notice what you're missing, not in regret, out of curiosity. Ask, where was I today? How many moments did I touch fully? How many minutes did I glaze over? And then gently call yourself back. Back to this body, back to this chair, back to this now. Now that breathes, now that holds, the now that waits patiently for your attention to begin. A lie told once is a disruption. A lie told twice becomes a pattern. A lie told daily becomes a world view. This is not a flaw of intelligence. It is a feature of the mind. The brain is built to prioritize repetition, to favor the familiar, to treat what returns often as what must be real, not because it's proven, but because it sounds right. Repetition feels like confirmation, like consistency, like truth. But it's not truth, it's exposure mistaken for evidence. Consider the echo. You hear something again and again. You're too much. You're not enough. The world is dangerous. People only love you when you earn it. And with each repetition, the sentence settles deeper. It's no longer a claim. It becomes background noise. Eventually, you stop hearing it. But you still live it. This is how belief forms, not from fact, but from frictionless familiarity. The more times you encounter an idea, the easier it is to process. And the easier it is to process, the more true it feels. Your brain rewards fluency. It marks the smooth path as valid. The jagged sentence gets flagged. The repeated one becomes sacred. And in that cognitive shortcut, the lie hides. Advertising works this way. So do conspiracy theories. So do childhood myths. So does self-doubt. They don't need to be convincing. They just need to be consistent. Over time, exposure replaces examination. You stop asking, "Is this true?" You start asking, "Where have I heard this before?" And recognition becomes reliability. The lie doesn't need facts. It needs a rhythm. The brain is musical, and belief forms through chorus, not just argument. Even when you know better, the repeated line sticks. Even when the logic breaks, the familiarity comforts. This is why propaganda works. This is why shame persists. This is why self-criticism survives long after the critic is gone. Because the lie, once repeated, becomes architecture. And like all architecture, it becomes invisible once normalized. You don't see it. You live inside it. You say, "This is just how I am. I've always been this way. I'm not good at that." You're not lying, but you're not telling the truth either. You're reciting a script, well rehearsed, long embedded, seldom questioned. And that is the most dangerous kind of falsehood, the one delivered in your own voice. So ask yourself, what have I heard so often that I stopped questioning it? What stories about myself have been repeated, not because they were true, but because they were loud? Which phrases have I inherited through repetition alone? You're difficult. You don't finish things. You're replaceable. You need to be perfect. Whose voice was that originally, and why is it still playing? Not all lies are malicious. Some were protection, some were simplifications, some were told by people who didn't know better. But repetition doesn't care about intent. It only cares about presence. What you hear, you carry. What you carry, you believe. And what you believe, you become. The mind prefers comfort over clarity, and repetition is comfort's language. Even pain can be comforting if it's consistent. That old shame, that old label, you've lived with it long enough to call it home. It may hurt, but at least it's predictable. So you return to the lie, not because it's safe, but because it's familiar. And the familiar is seductive. There is a name for this. The illusion of truth. It's been studied. Repeated exposure to a false statement increases the likelihood. You'll believe it, not because it matches reality, but because it becomes easier to process. Truth becomes a matter of ease, not accuracy, and you begin to trust. What flows smoothly through the mind? The lie becomes truth, not in content, but in cadence. But there is a way through. The first step is interruption. You must notice the rhythm. You must catch the familiar sentence as it rises in your thoughts, not to argue with it. That gives it power, but to pause, to say, there it is again, that old story, that repeated frame. Just naming the repetition is a crack in the structure. Through that crack, truth can re-enter, because truth often arrives awkward, unfamiliar, disruptive. It stutters. It contradicts what you've always assumed. It doesn't feel smooth. It feels new, and newness feels wrong until it's repeated enough to feel right. This is why healing can be disorienting. Kindness feels suspicious. Praise feels manipulative. Peace feels boring. Not because they're false, but because they haven't been repeated enough. To feel true, you must practice new phrases, not affirmations you don't believe, not slogans, but gentle truths. Try, I'm allowed to rest. It's okay not to know. My worth isn't conditional. This pattern can end. Say them not to convince, but to expose. Expose your mind to better rhythms. Let repetition become your ally. Because just as lies accumulate, so can gentleness, so can spaciousness, so can freedom, but only if you repeat it. Belief is not built in breakthroughs, it's built in echoes. The truth needs chorus, reverberation, a place to land. So say it again, say it softly. Say it when it doesn't feel natural. Say it until it lives in your bones. The way the lie once did. Say it until your nervous system remembers how to recognize it. And one day, you'll hear the old phrase rise again. You're not enough. But it won't land the same. It won't wrap around your spine. It will float, weightless, transparent. A ghost, not a gospel. Because now you've repeated something stronger. Now you remember your own voice. And now you can choose what stays. Some patterns arrive from data. You observe, you learn, you adjust. But some patterns do something stranger. They reverse the flow. They invent the data, not maliciously, not even consciously. They simply bend your perception until the world reflects them. You think you're gathering evidence, but you're only gathering permission for the story you already believe. This is how it begins. You adopt a pattern. It could be inherited. It could be defensive. It could be cultural. You don't question it. You wear it. And once worn, you start to see the world through it. You filter. You frame. You interpret. Until everything becomes proof. If your pattern says, I'm invisible, you notice the times you're overlooked, but not the moments someone reached out. If your pattern says, people leave, you brace for abandonment and miss the moments of presence. If your pattern says, I'm the one who always fixes things, you take over and then resent the silence. And when the outcome repeats, you call it reality. But it's not. It's recognition in disguise. This is not delusion. It's survival. The mind is a prediction engine. It wants coherence, so it prefers to be right rather than surprised. Even if what it's right about hurts you, you don't see the full field. You see the confirmation. And confirmation, repeated, feels like certainty. This is called confirmation bias. The tendency to seek, notice, and remember what supports your beliefs. But the term feels clinical, dry, external. In truth, it's intimate, soft, emotional. It's the reason you attract the same dynamics, stay in the same story, trust the same gut feeling, even when it leads nowhere. Not because you want it, but because it's familiar, because the pattern knows how to prove itself. You think the data shapes the pattern, but often the pattern shapes the data. You remember selectively. You anticipate selectively. You even behave in ways that invite the outcome you fear, not out of self-destruction, but because the pattern must survive. And survival in the mind is tied to prediction. The known pain feels safer than unknown freedom. You do not collect evidence neutrally. You tilt the scales. You remember the one insult. Instead of the 10 compliments, you remember the friend who left. Instead of the ones who stayed, you remember the failure. Instead of the 1,000 tiny efforts that brought you closer. And the more you remember these, the more real they feel. The more real they feel, the more likely they seem to happen again. And so, they do. Because your behavior follows belief. If you believe you are unworthy, you move differently. You ask less, you tolerate more, you shrink, you expect less kindness, and the world responds to the posture, not because it's cruel, but because it mirrors. And when it mirrors the wound, you say, "I knew it." The pattern is pleased, the data is confirmed, the loop is closed. But here's the twist. The loop is self-validating, but not self-correcting. No amount of external evidence will undo it until you see the loop, until you pause and ask, what story am I trying to prove true? And why does that story feel safer than its opposite? You cannot logic your way out of a loop. You've built emotionally, you must feel your way through it. Not with judgment, with curiosity. Some patterns feel noble. The martyr, the fixer, the skeptic, the overachiever, they come with rewards, with praise, with identity. But even noble patterns can narrow your world. They still filter. They still demand proof. They still punish deviation. The question is not, is this pattern productive? The question is this pattern mine? Or did it build itself, using my fear? The most dangerous part of these loops is that they feel earned. You say, "I've seen too much to believe otherwise. This is just how people are. This is what I've learned." But learning can be circular. If the lesson came from repetition, not truth, then the loop has no teacher, only a conductor playing the same song. And you are the orchestra, echoing what you've always heard. Breaking the loop is not about disproving the pattern. It's about stopping the test. You must stop trying to prove yourself wrong or right. You must stop measuring every interaction as more data for the old story, and instead, sit in not knowing. Not knowing is where new evidence lives. Not knowing is where patterns lose their grip. Not knowing is the first real freedom from certainty dressed as protection. Ask, what would I notice if I wasn't trying to confirm a belief? What might be true if I wasn't already convinced? What parts of the world have I filtered out because they didn't match my pattern? You don't need a new story yet. You just need to stop rehearsing the old one. You don't need proof. You need pause. You need space for contradiction to enter. And then It happens. The thing you didn't expect, the kindness you didn't predict, the outcome that doesn't fit. You hesitate, the pattern scrambles. This is an exception, it says. Don't trust it. But part of you feels something deeper. Not logic, not evidence, but expansion. A new data point. That doesn't feed the loop, but stretches it. And that stretch is where the pattern begins to lose shape. This is how it happens. Slowly, awkwardly, reluctantly, you let the moment be different. You don't dismiss it. You don't turn it into fuel. You let it stand alone, as its own thing, outside the loop, and from that moment forward, you have a reference point. You have a counterexample, a new lens. And the more of those you gather, the less convincing the loop becomes. Not because you argued with it, but because you outlived it. The pattern built its data, but now you are building yours. Not louder, not stronger, just more real, more nuanced, more alive, and from here, truth returns. Not as a final sentence, but as a question. You're no longer afraid to ask. There's a voice in your mind. It knows how to sound like you. It speaks in your rhythm. It uses your vocabulary. It wears your breath. But it's not you, not entirely. It's a composite, a mimic, a well-rehearsed echo. It speaks in second person, but you hear it as first. It says, "You're not trying hard enough. You always do this. Why are you like this?" And you don't question its authority, because it uses your tone. You assume its truth, because it arrived early. This voice did not begin inside you. It was stitched together from teachers, from parents, from culture, from comments said casually, but absorbed completely. It was shaped by glances, by praise withheld, by silence after disappointment, and eventually it learned your gait. It learned how to speak your doubt in your voice. This is not just inner dialogue. It is internalized narration. It doesn't just comment. It controls. It sets the parameters for what is acceptable, what is reasonable, what is possible. It tells you when to speak and when to shut down, when to risk and when to retreat, when you're worthy, and when you've lost the right to ask for anything. You don't remember inviting it in, but it lives there now. Software, persistent, strategic. Sometimes it pretends to be logic. It offers realistic advice. Don't expect too much. Play it safe. Remember how it went last time. Sometimes it poses as motivation. You're only valuable when you're producing. You don't deserve rest yet. Do better or fall behind. Sometimes it dresses as protection. Don't trust too fast. Don't get your hopes up. Don't show them how much you care. Each version has its own mask. Each one claims to serve you. And so you listen. You obey. You perform. You perform not for others, but for the voice. You measure your worth against its shifting standards. You check your progress by its impossible ruler. And when you fall short, it's ready. It never misses a stumble, never forgets a failure, never lets you settle. This is not discipline, it is domination, a constant narration framed as self-awareness but rooted in old scripts. You cannot outwork this voice because it feeds on your effort. Your hustle proves its point. Your burnout becomes its prophecy. You can't escape it by achieving more. It will move the target. You can't silence it by agreeing with it. It will whisper louder. Because its job is not to help you. Its job is to persist. And it does. Because you believed it was you. But there's a crack. A moment when you hear it say something. And it doesn't land the same way. It hits a little off-center. The phrasing sounds familiar. Too familiar, like something someone else said years ago at just the wrong moment. And suddenly you remember. That wasn't your voice. That wasn't your thought. That was a recording. Looped, buried, carried. The voice that sounds like you is often the voice that first taught you how to earn love, or how to avoid punishment, or how to be palatable, or how to survive in rooms. That didn't know how to hold you. It came early, so it came with weight. And now it holds the mic, even when the room is empty. But just because it speaks doesn't mean it must be obeyed. You can hear it without following. You can let it speak without calling it truth. You can pause, tilt your head, and ask, where did you come from? Whose voice are you repeating? Who taught you that I need to be hard on myself to grow? It won't like the question. It will tighten, because questions threaten its foundation. This is how you unmask it, not by shouting over it, not by replacing it with affirmations you don't believe yet, but by listening from the outside, as if it were a recording, in a language you're beginning to unlearn. You don't argue. You observe. You let it unravel under the light. And in that quiet, something else stirs, a voice you haven't heard in a while, or maybe never clearly. It doesn't push. It doesn't punish. It asks gentle things. What do you need? Can we rest now? Do you want to try again without fear? This voice is not urgent. It doesn't clamor for control. Because it's not trying to dominate. It's trying to return. This voice is yours. Your voice will sound unfamiliar at first. You've spent years tuning it out. You've confused the loudness of the imposter with the authority of your own knowing. But your voice lives under the noise. It's slower, more curious, less polished. It doesn't offer quick answers. It offers space. It will not demand your obedience. It will ask for your presence, and if you give it that, it will grow. This is not a war, it's a shift. From unconscious repetition to conscious recognition, from inherited scripts to chosen language, from automatic survival to self-authored thought. You will still hear the other voice, especially when you're tired, or triggered, or close to something real. But now, you won't mistake it for truth. Now you know how to trace it back. And in that tracing, you loosen its grip. So tonight, as the voice begins to stir again, don't rush to correct it. Just listen and ask, who taught me this sentence? Why did I need it then? Do I still need it now? And wait. In the waiting, you'll feel something shift, a kind of silence, a kind of space. And in that space, your own voice will begin to rise, not to replace, but to return. Numbers do not lie, that's what we're told. They are objective, neutral, pure. But purity is not clarity, and precision does not mean truth. A number can be exact and still deceive. A statistic can be flawless and still mislead. The math may be perfect, The framing may not. Statistics are not reality. They are reflections of choices, what to count, what to ignore, where to look, when to stop. Each figure hides its method. Each average forgets its outliers. You think the number speaks for itself, but it speaks for someone. And often it speaks to a story, already waiting to be told. Imagine a room, 9 people shivering, 1 person on fire. The average temperature is comfortable, but the truth is unbearable. This is how data betrays, by smoothing over the extremes, by erasing the edge cases, by mistaking central tendency for universal experience. The average hides the pain, the graph omits the scream, and yet you trust the chart. This isn't just about science, it's personal. You do this to yourself. You average your days, forgetting how 1 good hour can shift everything. You collect the wrong metrics, productivity, likes, comparisons. You make spreadsheets of your own inadequacy. You measure your self-worth with borrowed yardsticks, and then call the result objectivity. But numbers are not neutral in the hands of shame. You say, I've failed too many times. But what counts as failure? Who set the criteria? What timeline are you measuring against? You say, no one sees me. But are you tracking attention or intimacy? You say, I'm falling behind. But behind what? Behind whom? These aren't answers. They're questions disguised as conclusions. The statistics don't lie. They just don't tell the whole story. And in that gap, assumption fills the silence. The mind loves patterns. It craves prediction. And so it builds narratives out of numbers it never checked. It hears, 1 in 3 will struggle with this, and decides, I must be broken. It hears, most people recover by now, and whispers, why haven't you? The statistic becomes a verdict. The outlier becomes shame. You believe you are failing the average, but maybe the average is failing you. Here's the deeper paradox. The more we quantify something, the less we feel it. Data turns experience into abstraction. It pulls the blood from the wound. It turns the ache into a percentage. And when the number is neat, we stop asking better questions. How did this happen? Who decides what counts? Whose absence shaped this data set? You can't graph what isn't measured, and most lives are lived in margins. Statistical truth is valid, but it is never total. It cannot measure longing. It cannot calculate hope. It cannot assign decimals to grief. It cannot tell you how it felt to be the one behind the number. It cannot speak for the variable. That changed everything. Even your memory uses numbers falsely. You tell yourself, I always mess this up. I never get chosen. It's been years and nothing has changed. But always is rarely always, and never is rarely never. These are emotional statistics. Emphatic, convincing, but not clean. Still, you cite them, you build a case, you present your evidence, and the jury is your own belief system. Sometimes we weaponize numbers to end conversations. I'm just a statistic. This is what the data says. This is the probability. But lived experience laughs at odds. How many people survived when they shouldn't have? How many revolutions began with one impossible thought? How many recoveries were dismissed by the chart? The improbable is not impossible, and sometimes one exception is more powerful than 100 norms. So what do? We learn to ask, what's not being measured? What story is this number trying to tell? And is it the only story possible? What context is missing? Whose voice is excluded? And when the statistic turns inward, when it's your own self you're tracking, ask deeper, why am I counting this? Who taught me this was the metric that matters? What would happen if I stopped measuring and started listening? This doesn't mean you throw away the numbers. It means you soften their borders. You learn to hold the chart in one hand and the complexity in the other. You let the data inform, not defined. You look at yourself as more than the sum of your outcomes, more than the line graph, more than the bell curve. You are not a regression line. You are the point they couldn't fit, the noise mistaken for error, but rich with truth. Some truths refuse to be quantified. They live in the softness, in the shift of a gaze, in the beat skipped between sentences. They are hard to explain, but impossible to deny. You know them by how they move you, not by how they scale. And to live by those truths is to step outside the system that asked for a number, when what you needed was to be seen. So tonight, set the data down. Let the spreadsheet sleep. You are not here to be measured. You are here to be met. Let the average dissolve. Let the graph fade. Let the metrics unravel. And in their place, listen to the part of you that's always been true, even when it didn't add up. You want to be normal, even if you say you don't, even if you pride yourself on being different. Somewhere, deep inside, there's a whisper, just blend in, just don't make it harder, just be acceptable. Because being normal feels like safety, like smoothness, like rest. But what is normal? Is it a trait, a measurement, a shape? Or is it something far stranger? A mask passed down from the invisible crowd. Normal is not real. It is a consensus, a soft agreement made by loud repetition. Normal is whatever feels most expected in a given place, at a given time, by a given group. And like all agreements, it can be broken, but not without cost. You learned early how to wear the mask. You trimmed your behavior, softened your voice, laughed when others did, changed your clothes to match the tone of the room. Not because you were fake, but because being different felt unsafe. You weren't trying to deceive. You were trying to survive. But the mask doesn't just hide you. It reshapes you. You adjust slowly. You compromise. You flatten certain truths. You exaggerate others. Until one day you forget what was beneath the mask. You think the smile is real. You think the silence is a preference. You think the version of you who always says, "I'm fine," is the real one, but it's not. It's a response to pressure, to fear, to the endless demand to be digestible. Normal is just another word for unquestioned. It's not what's natural, it's what's repeated. And the more it's repeated, the more it solidifies. The more it solidifies, the more it excludes. You start to see difference as deviance, as a disorder, as a glitch, and you begin to apologize for what makes you vivid. This is the violence of normal It doesn't shout. It isn't threatening. It suggests. It says, "You're just a little too sensitive. Maybe don't bring that up here." Are you sure that's what you meant? It's not a big deal. You're making things uncomfortable. And with each suggestion, you step back. You minimize, you internalize, you start to carry the discomfort as your fault. But here's the secret: normal changes. What was once weird becomes fashionable. What was once taboo becomes mainstream. What was once punished becomes praised. And yet, in the moment, we forget this. We act as if normal is natural, timeless, moral, but it is none of those things. It is convenience, dressed as correctness, and it shifts when enough people decide to take off the mask. You've worn it for so long, you may not know where it ends. You may confuse politeness for personality, people-pleasing for kindness, emotional detachment for maturity. You've called your mask growth. But sometimes it was just silence. A silence you were rewarded for. A silence that made things easier for others and harder for you. Taking it off is slow. You don't rip, you peel, layer by layer. You ask, what do I do only to make others comfortable? What parts of me have I hidden so I won't be misunderstood? What have I never said aloud, because I feared the room would be quiet? These questions don't offer answers. They offer keys, and each key opens a room you once locked to survive. You may lose people when you unmask, not because you changed, but because they only loved what you performed. You may feel more alone at first, but that loneliness is honest. It holds space for the ones who will meet you unmasked. They will come, not as spectators, but as mirrors. And when you meet their eyes, you'll see a reflection that doesn't ask you to shrink. The opposite of normal is not abnormal. It is true, raw, inconsistent, complex. It makes some people nervous. It makes some people leave. It makes some people feel, for the first time, like they can breathe, because your unmasking invites theirs, not through instruction, but through presence, through the quiet fact that you exist as you are and refuse to apologize for it. This is not rebellion, it's return to the parts of you that don't fit the costume, to the instincts you once buried for peace, to the voice you softened so others wouldn't flinch, to the rhythm that never matched the metronome, but moved like music anyway. You do not owe the world your assimilation. You owe it your livelihood, even if it's awkward, even if it's loud, even if it gets misread. Because the moment you choose to belong to yourself, you stop needing to belong everywhere else. And that is freedom. So tonight, take inventory, not of what you've done, but of what you've suppressed. Ask, what have I done only to avoid attention? What parts of me are tired of hiding? What would I say if I wasn't afraid of seeming strange? Then say it, even if it trembles, even if it lands in silence. Say it without polish, without consensus, without needing to be normal, because normal was never the goal, only real. There are agreements you never signed, and still you follow them. You obey their contours. You honor their limits. You feel their weight every time you speak, hesitate, or shrink. Not because someone told you directly, but because the rules were in the air, unspoken, unwritten, undeniable. It starts early. The glances exchanged between adults, the praise that followed obedience, the silence that met your honesty. You learned what to say, how to sit, when to laugh, when to stay quiet, not because you were taught, but because you were trained. Training doesn't always come from instruction. Sometimes it comes from atmosphere. And the atmosphere says, don't cry too loud, don't take up too much space, don't question what keeps things comfortable. Make yourself small, make yourself helpful, make yourself agreeable. These rules were never printed, but they were enforced. With distance, with shame, with a subtle praise for disappearance, you internalized the code. Not out of weakness, out of wisdom, you adapted to survive. You learned what kept you loved, or at least not punished. And once learned, the code became instinct. You don't remember choosing it, but you live it. Every time you hold back, every time you agree too quickly, every time you apologize for existing too fully, you are honoring an agreement. That was never made in words. This is the unspoken contract. It exists between friends, families, cultures. It says, we don't talk about that. We don't cry here. We don't name what hurts. We don't rock the boat. We don't make things uncomfortable. You learn to read the room, so you don't get excluded from it. You learn to keep your truth, just soft enough not to echo. But the body remembers. Even when the mouth complies, the body tightens, the breath shortens, the shoulders curl, the voice lifts at the end of every sentence, as if asking for permission. You've been nodding for years, but your spine aches with disagreement. Unspoken agreements are efficient. They preserve peace. They prevent conflict. They maintain appearances. But peace without honesty is a slow form of harm, a silence that accumulates, a pressure that can't release. And eventually, the system you preserved becomes the cage you live in. The most dangerous thing about these contracts is that they make compliance feel like character. You think, I'm just easygoing. I don't like drama. I don't need to talk about it. But sometimes, easygoing is another word for trained silence. Low drama is another word for emotional invisibility. You confuse your survival strategy for your personality, and the longer you uphold the contract, the more it feels like you. But something cracks eventually. You speak the truth, softly, and the air shifts. A friend changes the subject, a relative frowns. The mood tightens. You've violated the code. You feel the breach. You're not sure what you did wrong. Only that you did. It's not always punishment. It's subtle disconnection. And you begin to wonder, is honesty always this lonely? But there's something beneath that loneliness, a deeper knowing. The realization that you cannot keep signing the contract and still find yourself. The realization that comfort is not worth the cost of vanishing. The realization that peace without authenticity is a performance you no longer have the energy to maintain. So you start asking, who made this agreement? Why does no one speak it aloud? What are we afraid will happen? If we finally say what we mean, you don't want to destroy the room. You just want to breathe inside it. And for that, the terms must change. Renegotiation begins with discomfort. You say, that hurt me. I don't agree. I want to talk about this. And suddenly, you're the disruption. But you're not being difficult, you're being visible. And visibility in a system built on quiet compliance feels like rebellion. Not everyone will welcome the shift. Some have built their identity in the very silence you're breaking. Some need the agreement to stay unspoken because it protects their image, their power, their comfort. But you're not responsible for preserving illusions. That cost you your truth. You're allowed to unsign, even if it means standing alone for a while. Eventually, you find others, the ones who also got tired of nodding, the ones who broke the code and are building new ones. In their presence, you feel a different contract forming. It says you can speak, you can cry, you can name what was never named before. You don't have to be soft to be loved. You don't have to disappear to belong. This contract is made in truth. It breathes, it bends, it grows, and you'll know it, because your body will stop bracing. Not all agreements need words, but all healing needs awareness. You cannot break a contract you don't know you've signed. So begin there. Ask, what silence am I protecting? What discomfort am I absorbing so others don't have to? What truth have I wrapped in softness so it won't disturb the surface? And what would happen if I said it plainly? The old contract will tug. It will warn you. You'll ruin the vibe. You'll be too much. You'll push them away. But another voice, smaller, will rise. Maybe it's okay to disturb what was never real. Maybe it's okay to be felt, not just tolerated. Maybe it's okay to say what no one else could say and still belong. So tonight, review the invisible agreements you've been keeping. Find the fine print. The clauses are written in fear, the conditions stamped in shame, and with each one ask, does this protect connection or just protect comfort? Is this love or choreography? And when you're ready, cross it out. You think your thoughts are your own, but trace them back far enough, and you'll find shadows, traces, fingerprints. They didn't begin where you think they did. They arrived through language, through tone, through subtle cues repeated in rooms you wanted to stay in. Every belief you hold was built somewhere, and often it was built in a crowd. This is not a conspiracy, it's proximity. You absorb what surrounds you, the ideas people defend, the jokes they reward, the silences they keep. And slowly, your thoughts adapt. Not because you're weak, but because you're wired to belong. The crowd doesn't have to be physical. It can be digital, cultural, imagined. The people whose approval you crave, the voices you carry into your solitude, the opinions you rehearse responses to in your mind. Before they're even spoken, these people, real or constructed, build architecture inside you, not loud, not direct, just consistent. And consistency breeds belief. Think of your mind as a city. You did not lay every brick. You inherited scaffolding. You moved through neighborhoods shaped by others. You adopted pathways because they were already paved. Now you walk those streets daily without asking who designed the map. The crowd teaches you how to think. By teaching you what not to think, you learn which questions are welcome, which doubts are dismissed, which ideas earn nods and which ones earn silence. And over time, you curate your inner voice to match the tone of the room. The room may be gone, but the tone stays. Sometimes the crowd doesn't even speak. They glance, they shift, they pause a beat too long when you say something real. You read the room, you adjust, not because you changed your mind, but because you sensed what the crowd needed you to believe. You wanted to stay close, so you reshaped yourself, first at the edges, then deeper. Eventually, you mistake their values for yours. You don't remember when you started believing that vulnerability is weakness, that silence means guilt, that rest must be earned. You don't remember where you learned to laugh at your own needs before anyone else could. But somewhere a crowd clapped or stayed quiet, and that was enough. The danger is not in being influenced. Influence is inevitable. The danger is in forgetting that influence occurred. You begin to defend the crowd's beliefs as if they were your own. You begin to gatekeep your own instincts. You silence yourself on the crowd's behalf, even when they're not there. This is how the crowd moves inside. You replay their reactions, you imagine their judgment, you edit your dreams to make them easier to explain. And what began as belonging becomes belief. But belief without examination is just obedience in costume. You don't need to leave the crowd, but you do need to question it. You need to ask, who lives in my mind when I'm alone? Whose voice do I still try to please? What parts of me have I muted because I feared they'd be misunderstood? What values do I perform that no longer feel true? Not every crowd was harmful. Some were necessary. Some taught you love. Some gave you language. But even good crowds leave residue. Even loving voices can become internal mandates. What matters is whether your thoughts still feel chosen or whether you've become a host. For inherited certainty, there's a cost to letting the crowd think for you. The cost is confusion. You stop trusting your instincts. You second-guess your preferences. You hesitate before desire. You defer. You analyze. You wait for consensus in a room that no longer exists. And slowly, your life begins to resemble a set of compromises no one explicitly asked you to make. The crowd doesn't have to push you. They only need to linger in memory, in posture, in unchallenged phrases. They stay until you name them. Naming breaks the spell. Try it. This belief came from my father. This hesitation was shaped by school. This fear echoes something I once heard in church. This ambition was born in comparison, not curiosity. You don't need to reject them all. You just need to trace them, because once traced, you can choose again. Not out of reaction, but out of awareness. Eventually, you start to clear the room. You invite the crowd to step back. You make space for your own voice. Not the one trained to echo, but the one that speaks before it's rehearsed. At first, that voice stumbles. It doesn't know how to justify itself. It's quieter than the crowd, less polished, but it is yours, and that makes it sacred. You won't silence the crowd forever, but you'll learn when it's them speaking and when it's you. You'll learn to pause when your thoughts sound too scripted. You'll learn to sit with uncertainty instead of reaching for familiar scripts. And slowly, your city will change. You'll repave streets, you'll rewire intersections, you'll open closed doors, not to erase the past, but to inhabit the present. The crowd may still visit, but now you'll host them with awareness. You'll say, I see you. I know where you came from, but I don't need your permission anymore. And in that moment, your thoughts become your own again, not because you made them from scratch, but because you remembered. You could choose. Every society has rules. Some are written, most are not. You obey them every day. You follow their choreography. You speak their language. You pause at their intersections. And rarely, if ever, do you ask, where did these rules come from? Why do I follow them? And what happens if I don't? Because by the time you're old enough to question, you've already built your life around the answers. Rules do not need signatures. They do not need enforcers. They need only consensus. And consensus is a quiet thing. It moves in looks, in posture, in tone, in what's celebrated, in what's never mentioned. You didn't choose these rules. You inherited them. And still, you carry them like vows. Some rules are functional. Stop at red. Don't steal. Use your turn signal. But others live in deeper layers. Don't be too emotional. Don't make others uncomfortable. Don't talk about grief at dinner. Don't question the tradition. Don't want too much. These rules are not codified. They are absorbed. Not in books. In bodies. You learn them through friction. You say the wrong thing, and the room quiets. You express too much, and someone laughs nervously. You ask a big question, and you're met with deflection. You're not punished exactly, but you are shaped, subtly, repeatedly, and over time you begin to self-regulate. You think you are being polite, but often you are being obedient. You think you are being mature, but often you are being silent. You think you are being easy to love, but often you are invisible. These are the rules that live beneath the surface, not in law, in loyalty, to systems you never consented to. These systems don't announce themselves. They reward compliance. They call obedience normal, and rebellion dramatic. They hand out praise for fitting in and discomfort for standing out. And so, you adapt. You don't even notice you're doing it. You just learn. Smile here. Don't ask. Edit that part of yourself. Speak in the dialect of acceptability. But here's the haunting part. Most people are following rules they cannot name. And because they can't name them, they defend them as truth. They'll say, that's just how things are. Grow up. Don't take it personally. Why would you question that? They don't realize they're defending someone else's idea of safety, a template handed to them, never unfolded. Even families have their own laws. We don't talk about mental health. We don't criticize tradition. We don't make others uncomfortable with our truth. Break one and you'll feel it, not in words, but in subtle distancing, in emotional coldness, in the way love retracts. It is not a punishment, it is enforcement, not by design, by inheritance. And so, generation by generation, we obey the rules that no one wrote down. We internalize the expectations that no one explained. We teach the children what we never questioned until someone says, why? and everything trembles. The first time you break a rule, you won't know if it's freedom or failure. You'll feel exposed, unstable, wrong. You'll say something honest, and no one will clap. You'll name something real, and someone will look away. You'll follow your rhythm, and people will say you've changed. And maybe you have, not because you broke the rules, but because you finally saw them. To see the rule is to remove its invisibility. You start noticing the scripts, the patterns, the places where you feel smallest, the conversations you've always avoided, the ambitions you've quietly buried. So you wouldn't break the illusion of being reasonable. You begin to realize how much of your life was built to satisfy someone else's outline, not because they asked you to, but because the system did, and you listened. This is not a mistake, it's a moment, the moment when you begin to rewrite the terms, to ask, what if I don't owe them comfort? What if I can disappoint with integrity? What if my loudness isn't a flaw, but a return? What if the rule was never holy, just old? Not all rules are wrong. Some protect, some guide, but they must be chosen to be meaningful. A rule you obey without consent is not a principle, it's a leash, and a leash doesn't become sacred just because you've grown used to it. You can start slowly. You can ask, where do I edit myself most? Who taught me that politeness means invisibility? Why does this rule exist? And who benefits from it? You don't have to become defiant. You only need to become aware. And from awareness, choice. Eventually, you stop asking for permission to be whole. You stop shrinking just because someone else hasn't stretched yet. You stop pretending that survival behavior is the same as truth. You break the rule, not to be a rebel, but to be real, and that is the quiet beginning of a new self. Some feelings arrive loudly. They knock on the door. They take up space. They demand to be named. Grief, elation, rage, desire. You know when they're here. But others slip in quietly. They don't feel emotions. They feel like facts, like weather, like background radiation. They shape your behavior but never introduce themselves. And so you live inside them, without ever calling them by name. These are the emotions that didn't register as feelings, the ones you mistook for character. You called it laziness, but it was unspoken sadness. You called it overthinking, but it was fear with nowhere to land. You called it numbness, but it was grief, unprocessed and patient. You called it being just tired, but it was your soul resisting false performance. When emotion hides, it doesn't vanish, it transforms. The body still carries it. It shows up as tension, distraction, procrastination, sensitivity to noise, a sudden intolerance for being touched, a need to scroll, a quickness to apologize. These are not flaws. They are flags, signals from feelings that were never allowed to speak, not because you refused, but because no one taught you how to listen. You may have learned to filter emotions before they reached the surface. Don't be so sensitive. Be strong. That's not a big deal. You're overreacting. You're making it about you. Each phrase trains the nervous system. to disqualify experience, to translate feeling into silence, and silence masquerades as composure. So you grow up thinking, I'm just an overthinker. I'm not very emotional. I move on quickly. I don't cry much. But under those statements, live emotions that were never named, they didn't disappear. They simply learned to pass through the system, unseen, like static, like code. Not all emotions arrive as tears. Some arrive as insomnia, some as clumsiness, some as always needing background noise, some as a sharpness in tone. You only notice after it lands. The more you ignore them, the more creative they become. Until eventually, you don't know what you're feeling. You only know something's off. And when someone asks, "What's wrong?" you say, "I don't know." Because you don't. Not consciously. Not yet. This isn't denial. It's an adaptation. You built a system that prioritized functioning over feeling. You had to. Life kept moving. People needed you. There was no room for collapse. So you became efficient. You became sharp. You became self-regulating. And emotion became a background process. But emotion ignored doesn't become still. It becomes distorted. It reroutes. It rebrands. It becomes irritating, apathy, hyperproductivity, control. And when you finally pause, you don't feel released. You feel restlessness because the emotion didn't leave. It just got lost in the system. To feel again can feel wrong at first, unfamiliar, unproductive, even indulgent. You may cry and feel embarrassed. You may get angry and apologize immediately. You may feel joy and wonder when it will be taken away. This is not a weakness. This is a re-entry. You are remembering how to register signals you once silenced for survival. You do not have to decode it all at once. Start small. Ask, where do I feel this in my body? What color would this sensation be? What would this ache say? If it had language, emotion is not data. It is the weather. It is a movement. It is true in flux. And truth does not require permission to exist, even if you can't name the feeling. You can allow it. You can stop trying to justify it. You can stop needing it to make sense. You can say, something is stirring and I will let it move. This alone is revolutionary. There is an entire catalog of emotion you've never been taught to recognize. Not just sad or mad or happy, but the softer ones, longing, awe, incomplete, anticipatory grief, existential ache, survivor's guilt, unmet celebration, nostalgia for something that never happened. These are real. They live at the edge of awareness, and they shape you until you see them. Once seen, they will begin to soften. You stop needing to explain everything. You stop pathologizing your pauses. You stop labeling every quiet moment as loneliness. You begin to trust that emotion can pass through without becoming permanent. That feelings do not always demand action. Sometimes they just want space, and sometimes you will feel what you buried years ago, not to relive it, but to release it. A delayed wave of grief, a sudden surge of joy, a realization that lands without warning. These are not breakdowns, they are breakthroughs. Proof that your body has kept the score. and is now ready to let it go. So tonight, sit with the feeling that doesn't have a name. Don't analyze, don't correct, don't optimize, just breathe, just feel, just notice. Emotion is not a threat, it is a signal that you're alive, and that aliveness, however quiet, however strange, is worth listening to. There is a version of you that only shows up when everything's falling apart. That self is fast, efficient, focused, relentless. You've seen them in motion. When deadlines close in, when someone needs rescuing, when the crisis won't wait, they don't hesitate, they don't crumble, they fix, they manage, they survive. And in those moments, you feel strangely alive. This is the emergency self, built in chaos, sharpened by necessity, trained by fire. You didn't invent them. You became them. When life offered no other option, they kept you moving. When stillness felt fatal, they held the pieces together. When no one else could, they rose. When everything else collapsed, you owe them much. But they are not all of you. The emergency self is skilled, but they are also stuck in high alert, stuck in old equations. Crisis equals relevance, urgency equals worth, collapse equals purpose. They believe you must earn your right to rest by first extinguishing every fire. They believe if you're not saving something, you're failing. And so, when peace arrives, they panic because peace feels unfamiliar, suspicious, empty. The world stops burning, and suddenly you don't know who you are. Without adrenaline, your edges blur. Without a problem to solve, you feel untethered. You search for something to fix, a mess to clean, a reason to matter. This is not sabotage, it's identity withdrawal. When survival becomes identity, safety feels like exile. You're praised in crisis. You're seen in collapse. You're needed when things break. But when nothing is wrong, you disappear, and that disappearance hurts more than the pain ever did. So you unconsciously recreate the conditions where the emergency self feels useful. You overcommit. You stay in toxic relationships just to be the one holding it all together. You delay healing so the role doesn't end. You call it loyalty, but sometimes it's just self-preservation. If you're the one keeping the system alive, you cannot be discarded. If you're exhausted, no one can question your worth. You don't rest, not because you don't want to. You don't rest because rest feels like irrelevance. The emergency self doesn't know what to do. With boredom, with peace, with joy that doesn't have a cost. They mistrust it. They ask, what's the point of feeling good if no one needs you to? They say you can rest after the next problem, after the next crisis, after you've earned it. But after never comes, because the identity feeds itself. Problem creates performance. Performance becomes pride. And pride defends the pattern. But here's what no one tells you. The emergency self is not your fullest self. They are a fragment, a mask made of steel. They know how to protect, but not how to receive. They know how to move, but not how to be still. They know how to rescue, but not how to be held. They are brilliant, but they are tired, and they are afraid of what will surface when they finally let go. Letting go feels like dying, but it's not death. It's an expansion. You are not abandoning strength. You are redefining it. You are telling the emergency self, you don't have to stay on the front lines forever. You are allowed to retire. You are allowed to become something softer. And softness is not a weakness. To live outside crisis is to meet the parts of you that never got to grow. The part that enjoys slowness, the part that feels worthy without proving, the part that delights, that rests, that asks for help. These parts may feel foreign, clumsy, even wrong, but they are you too, and they have waited a long time for permission to emerge. You may not trust peace at first. You may scan the horizon for the signs of collapse. You may sabotage calm, just to prove you were right to be ready. That's okay. Transitioning from emergency to embodiment takes time. You're not healing wrong. If you miss the chaos, you're not failing. If your nervous system keeps checking for alarms, you're just recalibrating. What safety means. Safety is not the absence of threat. It's the presence of allowance. It's the ability to exist without defending your existence. It's the space to feel without performing value. It's the day you wake up and don't need to be needed to feel real. Your worth is not tied to urgency. You are not a function. You are not a response mechanism. You are not a first aid kit for everyone else's wounds. You are a being, not a role, and roles can be retired, not with shame, but with gratitude. So tonight, speak to the emergency self. Thank you. You saved me. You got me here. But I am here now, and I no longer need to be saved. I am learning how to live, not just survive, not just respond, but inhabit. And maybe, for the first time, become. You think about the future more than you admit, but not with hope, not with curiosity, not with wonder. You think about it like a threat, a hallway full of locked doors, a test you're already failing, a mirror that shows only the worst version of what could be. You call it realism, but it feels like rehearsed despair. You are not imagining the future. You are surviving it in advance. This is what anxiety does. It pre-experiences pain. In the name of protection, it walks the whole path. Before you've even taken a step, it catalogs every way things could go wrong and calls that wisdom. It says, better to be disappointed now than surprised later. It says, prepare for the fall, so you don't get hurt by the landing, but the fall is sometimes only in your mind, and you've lived it 100 times before anything ever begins. You're not afraid of the future. You're afraid of not being ready for it. And so you carry every tool, every imagined response, every backup plan. You armor yourself against possibilities that haven't occurred and may never occur. But the armor has weight, and the burden you carry for the future makes the present unlivable. You do not experience joy fully. Because you're scanning for its ending, you do not trust love. Because you've already mourned its loss, you do not try. Because you've rehearsed the failure in such detail, that success feels rude. This isn't caution, it's pre-trauma. It's a loop of loss, played in advance, and it becomes your compass. Not because it leads you, but because it feels familiar. You learn to fear the future, not by accident, but by pattern. Something went wrong once, or many times, and no one helped you hold it. So your mind made a vow. Never again. Next time I'll see it coming. Next time I'll rehearse the collapse, until it can't surprise me. But the cost of that vow was wonder, spontaneity, peace. You traded them for vigilance, and vigilance never sleeps. Even your dreams are tense. You wake up tired. You're living two lives, the one unfolding in real time and the one collapsing in your imagination. This is not weakness, it's defense. The future, when seen through fear, becomes a fortress you'll never reach. You build towers of expectation, moats of self-doubt, and guardrails of avoidance. But you never step inside. You wait. You plan. You scan for certainty, and you call it patience. But really, you're delaying your life until the risk goes away. It won't. Not because life is dangerous, but because it's uncontrollable, and that truth is harder to accept than any imagined failure. The future does not exist yet, not in form, only in feel, and the feel is shaped by the lens you look through. If the lens is fear, the future becomes punishment. If the lens is control, the future becomes a test. If the lens is perfectionism, the future becomes impossible. And you become frozen because no action is safe enough to guarantee peace. You wait for signs. You wait to feel ready. You wait for permission. But readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision, a choice to step forward. Without full protection, without every question answered, without the future behaving exactly how you rehearsed it. You don't need certainty, you need courage. And courage doesn't eliminate fear, it moves with it. Some part of you believes that if you relax, you'll miss the warning sign, that if you trust, you'll get blindsided, that if you dream, you'll set yourself up for disappointment. But consider, what if the warning never comes? What if the blindsiding only exists in your mental cinema? What if the dreaming is the thing that makes the outcome better, not because it controls the future, but because it softens your path into it? When you fear the future, you miss the present, not just the joy, the resource, the clarity available now, the support that exists now, the version of you who is already capable enough. For what's ahead, you're not preparing. You're rehearsing doubt. You're gathering strength, but questioning its reality. You're pretending to get ready, but really, you're trying to earn safety before daring to feel alive. Safety isn't promised, but neither is collapse. And between those extremes is something radical: openness, presence, trust, not blind optimism, not manifesting perfection, but the trust that says, I can meet the future as it comes, not as I fear it. That trust is your return. So what do? You start by noticing. When does fear masquerade as planning? When do you prepare not out of love, but out of pre-punishment? When do you call it being realistic, when it's really just fear in professional clothing? And when do you hold yourself back under the illusion of wisdom? Then pause. Let the fear speak. Let it say what it came to protect. Thank it, but don't let it steer. Instead, ask, what does hope feel like in this same space? What would action look like if I wasn't expecting catastrophe? What's possible? Beyond defense, the future is not a threat, it is a space. And it is not asking you to solve it, it's asking you to show up to it. Not perfectly, not unafraid, just honestly. You don't have to earn your place in what hasn't happened yet. You already belong to what's coming, and it might just surprise you. Trust feels like something others must earn. Through time, through tests, through perfection. You wait, you scan, you measure, you tell yourself, I'll open when it's safe. I'll speak when they prove they can hold it. I'll trust when I've seen enough to know I won't get hurt. But this logic, while careful, builds nothing. It waits for connection, while withholding the bridge. Trust doesn't work backwards. It doesn't form after safety. It creates safety. It is not the result. It is the starting point. It's not earned by others. It's offered by you. Not because they've proven worthy, but because you're willing to relate, willing to let the wall lower before the castle is inspected, willing to enter the moment without a guarantee. This is the paradox. Trust feels like a risk, but withholding it creates the very distance we fear. You don't trust, so they don't show you more. They don't show you more, so you trust even less. The loop tightens, the space hardens, and soon, you're not protecting yourself. You're protecting your isolation. We think trust is a prize, that others must perform to receive it. But when trust is a reward, it becomes conditional, transactional, strategic. Real trust is not an agreement, it's a gift. One that says, I believe something good is possible here, even before the evidence arrives. And that belief makes a space for the evidence to emerge. Yes, you've trusted before and been hurt, so you flinch, you guard, you hold back the parts that once got dropped. This makes sense, but the answer to past harm is not total withdrawal, it's discernment, and discernment is not the same as delay. Discernment says, I will trust again, but I will notice who meets me there. Delay says, no one is worthy until they predict my every need. You cannot be seen if you refuse to stand where you can be seen. You cannot be known if your truth only whispers from behind a screen. You cannot be held if you never reach out. People do not know how to hold a shape they've never seen, and so you must reveal something first. A gesture, a truth, a trembling inch toward closeness, not to prove you're brave, but to give the other person a chance to arrive. This doesn't mean recklessness. You don't give all of you to everyone. You don't offer sacred parts to unsafe hands. But you begin, gently, intentionally. You say, I don't know why, but I want to trust this. I feel nervous, but I'm choosing to stay present. I'm afraid, but I'm not letting fear decide. These sentences are bridges, not declarations, but invitations. Trust, when given first, changes the energy of the room. It softens tension, it signals presence, it invites humanity. It says, I'm not here to win, I'm here to connect. And in that shift, the walls lower. Not always, but often, because someone has to go first. And why not let it be you? We fear that trust makes us powerless, that if we open too soon, we'll be hurt again. But consider, what if trust is a kind of power? The power to move freely without needing constant reassurance. The power to build something new instead of just testing the structure. The power to risk aliveness instead of managing appearances. Trust doesn't make you naive. It makes you available, and availability is the birth of real connection. So ask, what have I been waiting to see before I offer trust, and is that thing even possible? Without trust being present, what would it look like? To trust just enough to be honest, not to hand over everything, but to say, I'm here and I'm real. Even that is a start. You may still be hurt. You may still be let down. But now, you won't be wondering if it's because you never showed up. Now, you'll know you were honest. You'll know you extended something brave. And even if the other person wasn't ready, you were. And that readiness belongs to you. Trust given first is not weakness, it's faith, not in them, in you, in your ability to survive closeness, to navigate rupture, to name your needs, without pre-editing for palatability. It is a rebellion against the belief that love must be earned. So tonight, open just a little, not for performance, not for approval, but as a quiet gesture to the future you want. Say one thing you were afraid to say. Let one part of you come into view, and then pause. Let the moment breathe. You don't need to be met instantly. You just need to begin. There are feelings you did not know you had until you tried to say them. They didn't arrive as sensations or instincts or decisions. They arrived as words, half-formed, spoken softly, typed late at night, jotted into margin, and suddenly you understood something you couldn't feel until it had a name. Language does not describe experience. It distills it, draws it up from the depths, filters the fog into shape. Before the word, there was only weather, a pressure, a pulse, a blur of internal motion. But once spoken, the blur becomes a figure. The figure becomes knowable, and knowable becomes livable. This is not just communication, it's discovery. You don't write what you already know. You write to find out. You speak to become real to yourself. You name to make room. There are truths that do not surface until language invites them. Not because they were absent, but because they were waiting for recognition. You didn't lack emotion. You lacked a frame to feel it through. Think of the moment you said, I am not okay, and only then did you begin to cry, or the time you whispered, I'm angry, and felt the heat arrive, like it had been waiting in the wings. The feeling was there, but wordless. The sentence was the doorway. You are not separate from language. You are shaped by it. And so are your emotions. Words give contour to what was once just ache. They build scaffolding for the intangible. You say, I feel like I'm dissolving. And now your fear has form. You say, it feels like grief for a version of me that never lived. And now, you can mourn what was unnamed. Language doesn't always clarify. Sometimes it complicates, but even confusion when spoken becomes manageable. I don't know what I feel is already a feeling with shape. Ambiguity shared becomes solidarity. You are no longer lost alone. This is why silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it is a cage. You wait for the feeling to sharpen. Before speaking it, you wait for the perfect phrase, the correct emotion, the safe response. But clarity does not precede expression. Clarity follows it. You do not need to know what it means. Before you say it, you only need to say what feels close to true. Even wrong words can bring you closer. They offer contrast. They highlight what doesn't fit. They nudge you toward precision. Like a sculptor removing what doesn't belong, you find truth by removing what it isn't. Until one phrase, a strange metaphor, a sudden sentence, rings true in your bones, and in that resonance a feeling is born, or remembered, or finally allowed. Language doesn't just capture emotion, it makes it feel valid. You've heard someone describe your experience and felt relief before understanding why. You've read a poem and realized it was more accurate than your memories. You've said something you thought was silly, only to realize it was sacred. This is not a coincidence. This is emergence. Some feelings need to be spoken, to be believed. We do not feel alone until language draws the boundary, but we do not feel seen until language lights the space inside us. That light dash, however flickering, changes the way we carry our past. It reframes what we couldn't face. It reshapes what we blame ourselves for. It softens what we harden to survive, not because it explains, but because it holds. To speak is not always to solve. Sometimes it is simply to witness. You say, "This is how it feels." And now it belongs somewhere. It no longer floats in you like static. It grounds. And grounded pain hurts less than pain adrift. But the act of naming requires risk. To say the thing aloud is to make it real. And some realities are easier to hold in silence. So you hesitate, you edit, you wait for the perfect language, but there is no perfect phrase, only the first one, then the second, then the deeper one after that. Trust the process. Truth reveals itself in rhythm. Language is not just for connection, it is for compassion, for saying to yourself, "I see you now. I'm allowed to feel this. This makes sense." You do not need eloquence for this. You need permission. You need the courage to let the words come. Messy, incomplete, wrong at first. Because through the wrongness you find the shape that fits. And in that shape you return to yourself. So tonight, try naming what lives beneath the noise. Write a sentence. You're afraid it is too dramatic. Speak a feeling. You're not sure it is correct. Describe the ache like a landscape, like weather, like something you can walk through. You are not trying to impress. You are trying to reclaim it. And language is your map. There are dreams you forget instantly, fragments lost in light, strange, weightless scenes. that evaporate before you can name them. And then there are dreams that stay, not because they happened, but because they felt true. They linger like fingerprints. They carry more emotional weight than some memories, and sometimes they tell you more about who you are than anything your waking mind recalls. This is the strange power of dreaming to construct fiction that reveals what facts have hidden, to speak in symbols when direct language would collapse, to bypass logic and arrive at something deeper, truth, not in content, but in resonance. You dream you're trapped in a hallway with infinite doors, or on a train with no stops, or back in school, unprepared for a test. It didn't happen, but the emotion is real. You wake up and feel it in your chest, the panic, the helplessness, the tightness, and suddenly you remember how long you've been feeling this without realizing it. Dreams don't ask for accuracy. They ask for honesty, a kind of honesty that transcends event. They show you the emotional blueprint beneath your performance, the guilt you won't admit, the longing you've repressed, the version of you that keeps surfacing even when you think you've moved on. Dreams name what you avoid, through metaphor, through absurdity, through surreal echoes of your waking life. Memory is flawed. You forget details. You rewrite. You invent stories to keep your identity intact. But dreams have no such loyalty. They do not protect your ego. They do not ask for permission. They show you the whole shape of your mind, unfiltered. Even if you forget the plot, you remember the feeling. And that feeling holds a kind of truth your daylight voice could never speak aloud. Sometimes you wake from a dream with a clarity you can't explain, a realization, a warning, a desire you hadn't named before. Where did it come from? Not memory, not logic, but somewhere deeper, like your unconscious had been trying to reach you for weeks, and finally got a message through by painting it in symbols while the gatekeeper was asleep. The dream self is often bolder, more honest, more fluid. They say what you won't. They chase what you've buried. They call out the pattern you pretend is under control. And when you wake, you're left with a strange emotion, embarrassment, relief, longing. You dismiss it. You say, it was just a dream. But some part of you knows it wasn't just anything. It was a rehearsal, a confession, a mirror. Not every dream is meaningful. Some are just static, random firings, tangled threads of daily life. But even static has rhythm. Even randomness follows hidden structure. And the fact that your mind keeps choosing the same emotional textures, keeps building fear in the same forms, says something, not about the dream, about you, about what's asking to be felt. There are dreams of people you haven't seen in years, places that never existed, versions of yourself you don't recognize, but feel eerily familiar. You say, that wasn't real. But ask, why did it move me? Why did I cry for a stranger who never lived? Why did I wake with clarity about a problem I hadn't named? Why did that surreal image explain something my therapist couldn't? Because dreams collapse barriers that waking life defends. Sometimes a dream feels more like a memory than your own memories. It haunts you. You see it in flashes. You carry it into conversation. You mourn its ending, as if you've lost something. This doesn't mean it happened. It means it meant something. Dreams aren't false, just because they're unreal. Some truths need to wear masks before they can speak. You may spend your life chasing a dream that never happened, but held a version of peace. You've never felt awake, more a house with open windows, a quiet lake, a hand you held just before the light changed. These are not delusions. They're emotional truths. And maybe the body remembers them, not as fiction, but as a possibility, a preview of what could exist if you allowed yourself to stop censoring joy. So don't dismiss your dreams. Decode them gently, not like puzzles or like poems. Ask, what was the emotion? What did my dream self know that I've been hiding? What wants to be seen? Without proof? You don't need to interpret every image. Just listen, feel. Let the dream speak in its own grammar. It may not be clear, but it will be true. Dreams are not escape. They are return to the deeper logic, the symbolic clarity, the you beneath the you. And the more you listen, the more you start to speak that language in daylight. You begin to notice patterns, symbols, messages you once thought were random. Now feel familiar. You wake, still dreaming. You speak with more honesty. You feel without waiting for permission. Because now you've remembered the truth you didn't know you forgot. You wanted freedom. You said it for years. I just want to be myself. I want space to breathe. I'm tired of the cage. And then, one day, the door opened. The weight lifted. The pattern broke. The permission was finally yours. But instead of relief, you felt uneasy instead of joy. You felt strangely untethered, as if freedom, real freedom, was not lightness, but discomfort. No one tells you this. Freedom hurts at first, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. You've lived with tension for so long, your body calibrated to its pressure, your identity wrapped around resistance, your nervous system built on survival rhythm. When the rhythm stops, you feel the silence, like a threat, not because danger returned, but because the noise didn't. You were shaped by limits, by roles, by expectations, by the stories other people wrote about who you were. And even if they stifled you, they gave you something solid to push against, a shape, a structure, a known enemy. Freedom removes the wall, and without the wall, you don't know where to place your hands. You mistake stillness for absence, peace for apathy. And in that confusion, you wonder, did I do something wrong? You didn't do anything wrong. You just stepped outside the script, and now you're experiencing what most people don't tell you about growth. It's not euphoric, it's disorienting. Liberation comes not as a celebration, but as a subtle tremor, a gentle dismantling, a quiet voice asking, "Now what?" You were prepared for struggle. You rehearsed the fight. You knew how to survive without approval. But no one trained you for what comes after the breakthrough. When you're free, but still waiting to feel okay. when the old cage is gone, but you miss its structure, when the rules dissolve, and you must now make choices without fear steering the wheel. This is the anxiety of freedom. Nothing's stopping you anymore, which means you can no longer blame the chains. You are now responsible for your movement, for your joy, for your boundaries, for your expression, and that responsibility can feel heavier than the limitations ever did. Freedom does not feel like permission. It feels like exposure, like walking into sunlight. After years in the cave, it stings, you squint, you shield your eyes, not because the light is wrong, but because you've adapted to the dark. And adaptation takes time to reverse. You'll want to go back to something smaller, simpler, more defined, not because it was better, but because it was known. You'll revisit old beliefs just to feel the familiar weight. You'll replay old arguments in your head just to hear a voice you recognize. This is not regression, it's recalibration. You are detoxing from a structure you didn't realize had seeped into your bones. There is grief in liberation, grief for the version of you who never got to stretch, grief for the time lost to masks and mimicry, grief for the comfort of clarity, even if that clarity was constriction. And grief is not a contradiction to growth. It is its companion. Freedom demands a new kind of courage, not the courage to fight, but the courage to receive ease without suspicion, to receive silence without panic, to receive yourself without a script to follow. You must learn to inhabit what you once only fantasized about. And reality, unlike fantasy, asks for presence. This presence will feel raw. You may cry for no reason. You may laugh and then suddenly feel lost. You may feel a joy that's immediately followed by the urge to explain it away. Don't. Stay with it. This is what freedom actually feels like. Not clean, not cinematic, but uneven, alive, unedited. Eventually, the discomfort becomes direction. You start to trust that silence doesn't mean something is wrong. You stop scanning for crisis. When nothing needs fixing, you stop needing old stories just to feel like you still exist. And then you begin to choose, not from fear, not from rebellion, but from truth. A slow truth, a quiet one, the kind that only surfaces after the dust of your escape settles. So tonight, don't flee the discomfort. Let it sit beside you. Let it shake your hands. Let it whisper. This is what aliveness feels like when it isn't organized around fear. You are not failing because you feel unsettled. You are becoming. And freedom, true freedom, begins exactly here, in the first breath, outside the cage. Some beliefs are carved from evidence, from lived experience, from repeated cause and effect. But others begin as whispers, a passing thought, a stray comment, a moment of doubt. You didn't question in time. You said it once, quietly, "I don't think I can." Then again, after the next stumble, "Maybe I'm not built for this." You kept saying it until the voice stopped sounding like a voice and started sounding like truth. This is how belief works, not as a lightning strike, but as sediment, a single layer repeated over and over, until it becomes bedrock, until it becomes part of the structure you build your life on, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. Repetition is powerful. It doesn't prove a belief, it deepens it. You hear something once. You notice, you hear it 5 times dash. You remember. You hear it 50 times. You believe it, even if it started as a question, even if it never had evidence. The mind does not separate repetition from reliability. It assumes if I keep hearing it, it must be real, even when the voice saying it is your own. You believed you weren't good enough, not because someone proved it, but because you said it. Every time you faltered, you believed people always leave. Not because they always did, but because that belief made sense of the ache. You believed healing was impossible. Not because it never came, but because you stopped reaching for it. After the 5th false start, the belief didn't arrive from reality. It shaped reality, quietly, systematically. This is the loop. You believe something. You filter your experience through that belief. You interpret every neutral moment as confirmation, and the more it confirms, the more you repeat, and the more you repeat, the more it becomes sacred. Not in function, but in frequency. You don't notice the shift. You start calling it identity. You say, I've always been this way. This is just who I am. It's not negative, it's honest. But sometimes honest just means practiced, and the most practiced beliefs feel the most unchangeable, even when they're built on nothing but echoes. The echo can be anything: a voice from childhood, a cultural script, a comment that hit too deep, a wound that needed meaning. You carried it, you repeated it, you wore it like armor, and now you defend it. Not because it frees you, but because it frames you, and frames, even when false, can feel safer than uncertainty. You fear losing the belief more than living with its weight. Because without it, who would you be? If you are not the anxious one, then what do you feel? If you are not the broken one, then what do you deserve? If you are not the helper, then what do you do when no one needs saving? This is the hidden cost of belief. You shape your life around its demands, and when it no longer serves you, you don't just lose a story. You lose a structure. But there's a way out, not by arguing, not by replacing the belief with instant affirmations, not by forcing a new truth that hasn't settled yet, but by pausing the loop, by asking, when did I start saying this? What moment first taught me to reach for this sentence? What need was I trying to meet? By making it real, and then listening to the silence underneath it. The silence is not emptiness, it is room, room to rewrite, room to wait for a new truth to arrive, room to choose what stays and what can go. Beliefs lose power, not when you fight them, but when you stop feeding them. When you say, I've repeated this for so long, it started to feel like me, but I'm allowed to stop, even without a replacement, even without certainty. The new belief won't come right away. It will stutter. It will feel wrong. It will feel too soft. Next to the roar of the old sentence, but say it anyway. Say, I don't know yet. I'm allowed to learn a new way. I'm more than what I keep repeating. Say it again, not because it feels true, but because it makes room for something better to become true. Repetition built the old belief. Repetition can unbuild it. Not through force, through gentleness, a whisper once a day. Maybe I'm not broken. A pause before the familiar loop. Maybe that's not the whole story. A soft refusal. I don't have to repeat that sentence anymore. And eventually, the old phrase loses its rhythm. The loop skips. The pattern stutters. And you realize there's more space here than you thought. You do not need to believe the opposite. You just need to believe that new belief is possible, that your thoughts are not fixed, that your voice can change, that you are more than the echo you've been repeating for years. And when that belief takes root, you don't need to shout it. You just live differently. You respond with more breath. You take up more space. You move without apologizing for every motion, and your new behavior becomes your new mantra. So tonight, find the phrase that no longer fits, the sentence you've worn too long, the thought that plays like a jingle you never agreed to, and pause, breathe, then say dash. Softly, not as a performance, but as a beginning. That belief only lived because I kept repeating it, and now I don't have to.